began on an otherwise ordinary day. The kind of day where the air hums with routine, where life moves forward with the quiet confidence that nothing will change. In a small town where people still greeted each other by name and where strangers were rare, change came like a slow-moving shadow, creeping in from the edges before anyone realized it had arrived. She was young, full of the kind of energy that seemed to ripple out and catch the attention of anyone nearby. Her life wasn't perfect, no one's was, but it was hers, a tapestry of friends, family, ambitions, and small joys that stitched her days together. She didn't know that the threads were about to be pulled apart. The first sign was subtle, almost easy to dismiss, a man's lingering presence where he didn't belong. He wasn't from here. That much was obvious to anyone paying attention. In a community this small, new faces always drew questions. But this one didn't answer them. He moved with the restless air of someone searching for something, though no one knew what. He stayed quiet, but his eyes didn't. They followed her. Always her. It would be nice to have you with us on this channel. Please kindly click on the subscribe button now to join us on Crime Whispers. Turn on your notifications and leave us a like. At first, she noticed him the way you notice a flickering streetlight. There, in the periphery, irritating but ignorable. But over the weeks, he became harder to ignore. He was at the corner store when she ran errands, sitting 2 rows behind her at the diner, passing by her street too many times for it to be chance. There was no direct contact, nothing she could hold up as evidence, but the unease was real. She told a friend once, half laughing to make it sound lighter than it felt, "That guy's always around." The friend shrugged, told her she was probably imagining it. Maybe she wanted to believe that. Maybe she almost did, until the night it changed. It was late, the streets nearly empty, the quiet broken only by the occasional hum of a passing car. She was walking home, the familiar route she'd taken countless times. But that night, the air felt different, heavier, as if the dark itself was watching. She caught the sound first, slow footsteps matching hers. She stopped. The sound stopped. She turned, and there he was. Close enough now that she could see the shadow cutting across his face, close enough to catch the glint in his eyes. Her heart raced, pounding so hard it seemed to echo in her ears. She walked faster. He followed. She made it to her front door and slammed it shut behind her, locking it with hands that shook more than she wanted to admit. She told herself she was safe, but safe is a fragile thing, and that night, it began to crack. Over the next week, she couldn't shake the feeling that her home was no longer hers alone. Small things felt off. A window she was sure she'd closed was open. A chair was slightly out of place. Her keys were not where she'd left them. It could have been nothing. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. Then came the morning she didn't show up for work. Her boss called. No answer. Friends tried. Nothing. By noon, unease had spread through the tight-knit community. She was reliable to a fault. The type to call if she was running 10 minutes late. Disappearing without a word wasn't just out of character. It was unthinkable. By late afternoon, police were knocking on her door. Inside, everything looked normal. Too normal. There were no signs of a break-in, no struggle. Her phone lay on the kitchen counter, still plugged in. Her purse was by the door. It was as if she had simply vanished mid-step. The search began immediately. Volunteers combed the nearby woods. Officers questioned neighbors. But answers were slippery, and the only lead anyone could offer was the vague recollection of a man. The same unfamiliar man, seen near her house the night before she disappeared. For days, the search widened. Her face appeared on flyers, in local news reports, taped to the windows of every shop on Main Street. Friends and family gathered at the community center, clinging to hope like a lifeline. But hope has a cruel way of fading when the days turn to weeks. When they finally found her, it wasn't the reunion anyone had prayed for. Her body was discovered in a wooded area miles from town, hidden in a shallow grave. The news rippled through the community like a shockwave. Strangers wept. Friends collapsed. And somewhere, in the quietest corners, anger began to burn. The investigation intensified, and soon all threads pointed to him. The man who never belonged, the man who had been watching her. Witness statements placed him near her home, near the site where she was found. But knowing and proving are two different things, and he denied everything. Still, there were cracks in his story. Surveillance footage showed him buying duct tape and rope in a hardware store days before her disappearance. His phone pinged near the wooded area on the night she went missing. The evidence was stacking, brick by brick. When they arrested him, the relief was sharp, almost dizzying. But for her family, there was no relief that could undo what had been done. The trial was grueling, dragging every detail of her last days into the open. Her friends took the stand, recounting her fear. Experts described the forensic evidence, and in the center of it all sat the man who had stalked her. Expressionless, unflinching, as if the human cost meant nothing. The verdict came, guilty. The sentence was long, but no number of years could measure the hole left behind. Her story became a warning, whispered in the community. Trust your instincts. Don't dismiss unease. Evil often starts with something small, a glance, a shadow, a footstep in the dark, before it grows bold. And in the quiet after the trial, when the reporters left and the flyers came down, the town returned to its routines. But for those who knew her, the streets would never feel as safe, and the night would always hold a trace of the footsteps that once followed too closely. What do you think about this tragic event? Please leave your thoughts in the comment section and tell us where you are watching from. Your engagement helps us grow this channel. The man's name became public within hours of his arrest, splashed across news tickers and front pages. It was strange hearing it, an ordinary name, the kind you might expect to see on a mailbox or a school roster. But now it carried weight. It was no longer just a name, it was a warning. His background trickled out in fragments. He drifted from town to town, never staying long, always keeping to himself. No close friends, no real family ties anyone could find. Jobs held briefly, abandoned without explanation, and a trail. Not of convictions, but of suspicion. Women who'd seen him lurking near their homes. A teenager who swore he'd followed her down a back road. Complaints filed, but never enough to stick. He'd been a shadow moving just outside the reach of consequence. Until now. Police pieced together her final hours with chilling precision. The night she vanished, he had parked 2 streets over, watching until her lights went out. He broke in through a back window, stepping inside with the calculated patience of someone who'd done it before. No signs of struggle because she never got the chance. By the time the clock struck midnight, they were gone from the house, she taken against her will, and he steering them toward the woods. The prosecution spared no detail in court. They painted the picture with evidence. Fibers from his car matching her clothing, soil samples linking him to the burial site, her DNA found in the trunk. Every new piece drove the nails deeper into the coffin of his defense. But even with the case so tightly bound, there were moments in the courtroom when it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Like when her mother took the stand. She didn't cry. Not in that moment. Instead, she spoke with a steady voice that seemed to cut sharper than any tears could. She talked about her daughter's laugh, the way she'd sing while making coffee, the stubborn streak that had been there since childhood. Then she turned to him, meeting his eyes for the first time. The silence was heavy. When she spoke again, her voice didn't waver. You took more than a life. You took away the light she brought to everyone she knew. It wasn't a plea. It was a statement. A fact he could not erase. The defense tried to claw at the case, questioned the chain of custody for evidence, implied that the DNA transfer could have been accidental, suggested that witnesses misremembered what they saw. But their arguments crumbled under the weight of what was undeniable. When the jury returned, the room felt suspended in time. No shuffling, no whispers, just the sound of the foreperson speaking the single word that everyone had waited to hear. Guilty. Her family exhaled as if they'd been holding that breath for months. Some cried openly, others just sat, the shock of relief mingling with the permanence of loss. The sentencing was swift, decades in prison, with no chance of release for what would likely be the rest of his life. But in private, her father said what many were thinking. Justice isn't the same as getting her back. After the trial, the media moved on. News stories took the headlines. But in town, the absence lingered. Her home was eventually emptied, sold to strangers who didn't know the history. Her favorite cafe kept her photo by the register for months before quietly taking it down. The walking path she used every morning felt different, as if it remembered. And still, whispers followed. People asked why she hadn't reported him sooner, as if fear follows a neat script. Others wondered how many times he'd done this before, and simply gone unseen. For her closest friends, the aftermath was messier. Nightmares. Checking locks twice, sometimes 3 times. Flinching at footsteps behind them. They carried her story like an invisible weight, one they couldn't set down even if they wanted to. Law enforcement used the case in training seminars, showing how small warning signs can point to larger dangers. Advocates pushed for better systems to track repeat offenders. But policy changes came slowly, and in the meantime, other names began appearing in the news, other faces on missing posters. Her story wasn't the first, and it wouldn't be the last. That was perhaps the hardest truth to swallow. There's a cruel rhythm to violence like this. It starts with proximity, someone always nearby, always watching. Then comes the erosion of normalcy, the small intrusions that chip away at a person's sense of safety. And finally, the break, the moment it crosses into something irreversible. By the time the danger is undeniable, it's often too late. In the months after, her family spoke publicly about trusting instincts. They told anyone who would listen that you don't need proof to act on fear. They shared her story not to reopen wounds, but to make sure others didn't ignore the quiet signs. And somewhere, behind prison walls, the man who took her life sat in silence, stripped of the control he once wielded. But even then, the shadow he cast stretched far beyond the cell. Time didn't heal in the way people promised. At first, there was an unspoken expectation that the seasons would do their work, that grief would slowly fade into something softer. But for those closest to her, the wound stayed sharp. Birthdays came and went with an empty chair at the table. Holidays felt incomplete, as if they were always waiting for her to walk through the door. The little things were the worst. A song playing in a store that she used to love. The smell of her perfume drifting from a stranger. Passing a street where she once lived. Each reminder was a quiet gut punch, catching people off guard and sending them right back to that night. The town, too, carried scars. For months, neighbors double-checked their locks and looked over their shoulders in parking lots. Parents gave their kids stricter curfews, warning them to avoid shortcuts. Some people moved away entirely, unable to reconcile the image of their quiet community with the reality of what had happened. Her friends became accidental archivists of her life. They kept photos, voice messages, the silly videos she'd send late at night. They told her stories to anyone who'd listen, refusing to let her memory shrink to a headline or a cautionary tale. In their minds, she wasn't defined by what happened to her. She was still the one with the quick laugh, the stubborn will, the knack for making people feel seen. But the case left another legacy too, one harder to talk about. It forced an uncomfortable conversation about patterns, about the way predators move long before they strike. The man who killed her didn't appear out of nowhere. There had been moments, reported and unreported, when he tested boundaries, gauged reactions, refined his tactics. Society often calls these red flags, but that phrase feels too neat, too harmless. In truth, they're alarm bells. And yet, alarm bells only work if someone's listening. Advocates began using her case as a rallying point. Workshops on recognizing stalking behavior. Campaigns urging faster intervention when multiple complaints surface about the same person. Pressure on law enforcement to treat these warnings as indicators, not isolated incidents. Her family joined the cause, though it cost them to relive her story in public. They sat on panels, spoke at schools, met with lawmakers. Their message was always the same. You don't wait for harm to happen before acting. You cut it off at the first sign. Because waiting can be fatal. Behind bars, he remained mostly silent. No public apologies, no statements. His absence from the conversation was almost eerie, as if his role in the story had ended the moment the cell door closed. But for her family, his silence was irrelevant. Prison wasn't about closure, it was about containment. The real work was making sure there were fewer people like him in a position to harm others. A year after the sentencing, the town held a memorial walk. Hundreds showed up, some who'd known her, others who'd only heard her story. The route followed her old jogging path, ending in the park where she used to sit and read. At the finish line, they released lanterns into the night sky. Watching them rise, her mother said quietly, "She should have been here to see this." The case file now sits in storage, neat, official, and cold. But her story isn't trapped there. It lives in the small decisions people make every day. A friend walking another to their car at night, a neighbor speaking up when something feels off, a bystander stepping in before a situation turns dangerous. In that sense, her life continues to move through the world, shaping choices, shifting the way people see each other. And maybe that's the only kind of justice that lasts. Not the sentence in a courtroom, but the invisible chain of moments that keep someone else safe. Because when violence steals one person, it's never just one person. It takes the version of the world they made brighter, and it forces everyone left behind to rebuild in the dark. The light doesn't come back all at once. Sometimes it never fully returns, but it's carried forward in pieces, in stories told, in lessons learned, in lives saved because someone, somewhere, remembered her. And maybe that's enough to keep the shadow from winning. Thanks for watching Crime Whispers. If this story gripped you, like, comment, share, and don't forget to subscribe for more disturbing true crime stories that lurk in plain sight. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.